The Dog and Deuce Show is produced by Dymar Productions in association with Studio B Productions.
Welcome to a very special interview edition of Dog and Deuce. Check out our YouTube page at youtube.com/DDonSports. You can subscribe, you can give a thumbs up, leave a comment, do all those YouTube things. It helps us out a lot. James, good job. You pulled quite the catch for this interview. Mr. Frank Turner, good job, man.
Mr. Frank Turner coming in live from the UK. What a interview we are about to embark on.
The Frank Turner. Now, this is a little bit different for us. We over the years we've done interviews with people who don't really fit into the realm of the show, or traditionally the realm of the show. We've had Brandon Steinekert from Rancid. We've had Adam Carolla. You know, people who aren't really sports people, we've had them on the show over the years. So if you're new here and you're wondering what it is, it's just something we do from time to time. We find interesting people and James finds interesting people and gets them on, and books them on the show. Frank Turner is one of my all-time favorite musicians. He's my favorite songwriter. If you are not familiar with his music, you should definitely go binge everything. Start from the beginning. He's outstanding. He came from the punk scene. He is now a singer-songwriter. He performs with a full band. There's no way I'm going to be able to explain what his music is to you. It's just something that really needs to be experienced. So, James, I know you're not you're a fan, but you're not as big of a fan as I am. So I really appreciate you going out and snagging this interview for us.
Yeah, man. You know, I will. First of all, we appreciate him coming on, and like you say, I knew your connection to Frank
I got a tattoo.
Turner.
I got a Frank Turner tattoo on my arm.
You do. You should have showed him that.
I should have. That's
what
okay.
are you doing, man?
Well, dude, because everyone is like goes up and shows these guys, like musicians, tattoos they have of them. Like it's at some point it's got to be like, cool. Thanks.
Okay, fair enough.
I mean, these days,
nonetheless, it's so whenever we're stepping outside. Here's my take. Whenever we're stepping sort of outside of our normal flow of the podcast, it has to be someone very special, someone who can actually, we can relate to, we are interested in speaking with, and we know who will say great things, right? And make sense of whatever we're asking them about. And, it's so weird to me because I just want to call him Mr. Turner. Mm-hmm. That's like how I refer to everyone. And I don't know. I not even in the army. So Mr. Turner did not disappoint. And, I'll be forever grateful that he gave us such a long time and just was willing to talk about whatever was thrown his way.
Yeah. And man, he just gives some good stuff. He talks about growing up and being straight edge in the UK, talks about what it was like, coping with COVID. And he's a guy who's, his motto for his band is always on tour. So he talks about what it's like coping with being forced to stay put because of COVID, making music. It was quite a conversation, and we really appreciate Frank for joining us on this episode. So let's go ahead and run it. It's Dog and Deuce. Mr. Frank Turner joining us from all the way across the pond. I would say good morning, but I guess it's evening for you. Thank you so much for joining us. How you been during the quarantine and COVID and all that kind of stuff?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's nice to be here. That's a big question that you opened with there. Good Lord. I mean, what a year and a bit it's been, really. I have a bit of a theory. I'm launching straight in here. I have a bit of a theory that a lot of people prior to 2020, and I include myself in this, there's a little part of you that kind of was secretly longing for some kind of like world calamity, catastrophe thing. Do you know what I mean? Whether you're kind of wishing that you would, what would I have done if I'd lived through the war or whatever? Do you know what I mean? Or the 60s or whatever people want to say. And now we've lived through our thing, and it's terrible. It's awful. Like, it's just like, I wish we hadn't, you know what I mean? And it's certainly, and having said that, like the last year is nothing compared to like living through the war. Good Lord. So like, I think for me, it's put quite a lot of things in perspective, and it's made me kind of grateful for some things that I had before. And, just a bit more cautious about just kind of idly wishing for kind of catastrophe. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it did feel like we were kind of part of something big, which, we haven't felt that for, I don't know, here in America since 9/11, but even, this is much different. This is it just felt like there was something globally that was connecting us all and dividing us all, and it was a very interesting thing. How is everything in the UK? Are you guys still locked down? You're not still locked down, are you?
We're sort of semi-lockdown right now. We went back into a hardcore lockdown in January, which was frustrating for me because I was working on a new record in the studio in December, and we broke for Christmas and said, we'll be back in January. We only need like 5 more days to finish the album. Brilliant. So they've opened the pubs outside as of just over a week ago, which was really kind of quite something, like watching the English kind of flock to the pub. It was kind of emotional. I mean, I was like, I have to go and just buy 1 pint. I don't even want to drink tonight, but I have to go and buy 1 pint. And then I was out of practice, so I went and bought like 8 pints, and then I couldn't talk to anyone for like 3 days afterwards. So, but and like you're allowed to kind of meet people outside now and this kind of thing. And we're just under a month away from being able to like stay over at people's houses and stuff like this. So, it's coming along slowly. People getting vaccinated. It's moving along.
Good. That's good to hear. And James, feel free to jump in anytime if you got something.
So there is an end date for your sort of semi-lockdown. I wasn't aware of that.
There is, but I'll believe it when it happens. Like, really? I mean,
let me ask you this. Let's give our listeners and viewers a little bit of background. Tell us sort of, the genesis of your wanting to be a musical performer, if you will, or an artist.
Well, my parents don't really listen to modern music. They don't really believe in drum kits and electrification. Let's put it that way. And so rock and roll, I mean, obviously it was around in the way that it's on TV adverts and stuff like that, but it just wasn't a feature of my life. And then when I was about 10 years old, 2 things happened. In my mind, they happen in the same week. I don't think that's remotely true, but you know what I mean? You finesse your memories. But I stumbled across the music of Iron Maiden thanks to a friend of mine's older brother. And I was playing Games Workshop. Do you know Games Workshop is like Dungeons and Dragons kind of vibe, little lead figurines and orcs and goblins and that kind of business. I was really into that, and I was playing that. And then there was an Iron Maiden poster, and I assumed it was something to do with that. And my friend was like, "Oh no, that's this band that my brother listens to." And I was like, what? And, got a copy of Killers, and then that was that. And then shortly thereafter, the Freddie Mercury tribute concert was broadcast live on the TV over here from Wembley Stadium. And, the opening bill was Metallica, Guns N' Roses, I think it was Extreme, and then they had members of Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin, obviously lots and lots of Queen. And my sister and I watched it kind of with our jaws on the living room carpet, just being like, holy cow, and certainly for me, I was like, I have found it. And just from then it was like, I want to do that. How do I do that? And I think at the beginning, that might have involved just going to it would have probably been enough. My parents actually banned me from going to live shows for a long time at that point in my life, because I'm old enough now to kind of look at it with a degree of sympathy. Like, my parents just had no experience of that world. And I think my mother was under the impression that rock and roll shows were just bikers injecting each other with heroin. And, I've been to a couple of shows like that now, but most of them aren't like that. But it was also, I mean, the very next Christmas, I bugged my parents and got a starter electric guitar. Do you know what I mean? Like a cheap $60 electric guitar from the catalog store. And, I just wanted to be part of it. And now I'm here, and that's a very short version of my life.
I got that from my parents too. When I was in high school and going to shows and kind of discovering the scene that I'd be a part of, I got a lot of that. I know what you do at those concerts type of thing. It's like, that's not even close to what's going on. Like, what you think is happening, I'm not that cool. Like, I'm just going
I had the strangest time in my late teens. I was straight edge, and it was a very which was kind of unusual over here, because that type of hardcore is not really native to the UK. And there were some people who were into it, and they were my friends, but like, it was a pretty obscurest thing. And my parents were pretty convinced I'd joined a cult, and I had the very weird experience that at the age where most of my friends were trying to sneak drinks out of their parents' drinks cabinet and get absolutely wasted, my parents were trying to make me drink because they thought I joined this like sober cult or something. So literally like, my best
great.
friends would just be like sort of out of their minds and smoking weed and all the rest of it, and I would be like, no, I'm clean and pure and listening to Earth Crisis, and they'd be like, please have a glass of wine with dinner, and I didn't want to. So
yeah, I mean, go ahead, James. Sorry.
That is an interesting story. I think we just spoke about like 2 weeks ago how I consider Iron Maiden the best band name ever.
It's pretty good.
Like if you whenever time I think about it, I'm like, man, if I could name a band, it doesn't even have to be hardcore. It just symbolizes so many random things. Like, I don't know. Yeah. Interesting that Iron Maiden was the beginning of your interest into rock and roll.
So
a friend of mine was in a hardcore band called Cut Your Own Head Off, which has always been my favorite band name. But I'll take Iron Maiden's probably more universal.
That rivals. That's Cut Your Head Off rivals for sure.
That's a good one.
And so as you progressed, I mean, give me a little background. Obviously, we're not in the the music industry, but how hard is it sort of cutting your teeth as you rise up in the music industry?
Well, I was very fortunate in the sense that, so I got into metal and kind of rock and that kind of thing. And then, Nirvana was kind of going on around that time. So I got into Nirvana, and then Kurt Cobain always talked about how he was a punk in interviews. So I got like Clash and Sex Pistols records. And then like the Green Day Offspring thing blew up when I was like 13 years old. And that was big for me. And then, I mean, I'm sure this was the same over there, but like over here, like for every 10 kids who bought a copy of Dookie, like 2 would find out who NoFX were, and 1 of them would find out who Black Flag were. Do you know what I mean? It's like there was a filtration thing going on. And I was definitely the kid who got into Black Flag and then got into, Dead Kennedys and Catharsis and all the weird, obscure punk. And the thing was, like, there is that DIY ethic within punk rock. And the hardcore scene that I located, which was where I was busy being straight edge as a teenager, it was very small. There was probably 400 or 500 people in the whole country who were interested in that kind of music. And it meant that a UK tour meant you played 4 shows with 100 people at each if you were like kings of the scene. You know what I mean? But like, and that would be like London, Leeds, Glasgow, and Norwich or something. And so, yeah, it was very underground, but it was very DIY, and it was very kind of like welcoming. It was like the barrier, the price of entry was showing up. Like if you cared about that kind of music and you found out where the shows were happening, then you were part of the scene. Do you know what I mean? There was no clique going on. It was just welcoming in a way that was a very powerful model for me that remains important to me. Like in terms of what I do going forwards, I always want there to be no barriers to entry. I don't want anyone to have to be cool to get into my music. Do you know what I mean? Like, or to get into a show or whatever. That sucks. But yeah, like I said, the thing about that scene was, so I've kind of stumbled across the scene, got really into it. And it was like, within like a year, I was like putting on shows in bars that I wasn't actually technically old enough to even get into. And I was like putting out a zine, and I was playing in like 5 bands, none of which ever played any shows, do you know what I mean? Or whatever. But it was like, and so that was kind of like training wheels, you know what I mean, for being a musician in a way that a lot of people don't get. And particularly as I got older and met friends of mine who sort of came up through the more kind of traditional indie rock scene or whatever, like they didn't have any of that, and I did my first tour when I was 16, and in that circle of friends, that's not particularly unusual. And by the time I was like 25, I was touring with 25-year-olds who'd never been on tour before, and I was just like, "What have you been doing?" Do you know what I mean? Like, so looking back now with all of the kind of a crude Asian wisdom of a 39-year-old, it's like I feel quite fortunate that I had that kind of baby steps route into being a musician. And not just being a musician, it also taught me right at the beginning that being a musician doesn't just mean sort of showing up in a limo and playing a show and then disappearing into the night. Like, I was also helping load bands on stage, and I was helping set up shows, and I was doing flyering and pressing CDs and copying posters and putting them up. And it was quite holistic. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think everyone because I'm 40 years old, I think everyone who kind of came up around that time is a little nostalgic for those moments. I mean, now you go to a show and it's pretty big, even if it's, like Rancid or something like that. It's still a big show. But every once in a while I'll get to a show and it'll be small, and, the band will be carrying their own gear. And it's like, man, I miss discovering those bands. Like, I really miss that.
Yeah, but here's the thing, man. That kind of stuff is still going on. It's just that we're too old to be invited. And
Exactly.
in a way that we should be too old to be invited. Because I remember being a 16-year-old kid, and there was some old fart in a dead Kennedy's jacket at the back complaining about how it wasn't the same as it was in his day. And we all thought that guy was an idiot, and he was an idiot. And do you know what I mean? It's like, and indeed, more specifically, like, I think a lot of people, and I've been guilty of this as well, is like we look for it, that kind of feeling and that excitement in the same place that we found it, like, you know, kind of white guitar bands with bad haircuts. And it's like, certainly talking about the UK right now, like I suspect that the grime scene is pretty much the equivalent. You know what I mean? It's really exciting. It's really underground. I don't really know anything about it. And I certainly don't know where the cool shows are happening. But they are happening.
Right.
And I'm very excited about that. And the bands that we came up with are now, they're all ancient. Do you know what I mean? Like,
right.
And therefore they play big shows because they became successful. And all of that is great. And I'm not complaining about any of this, but like, I never want to be that old guy in the Dead Kennedy's jacket complaining. Do you know what I mean? Like, there is cool stuff happening. It's just that we may not any longer be the demographic who knows about that kind of thing.
Exactly.
And that's fine.
Well, and you mentioned Green Day and Offspring, and I kind of have a theory that anyone who got into punk music around that time and then got through the filtration system down to NoFX and Black Flag, I have a theory that they either gravitated more towards Dookie or more towards Smash, and that kind of determined what kind of music they kind of fell into, or what genre of punk rock they kind of fell into. So I got to ask, which one?
You're now asking me. God damn it!
Yeah,
the problem with you asking me this question, and I can't say this without sounding like I'm like dropping names. So you know, clang. But like, I have done shows with both Green Day and Offspring, and like hung out with both of them. And you're now forcing me to choose one or the other in a public forum, and that's just not fair. God damn it. Having said that, I mean. I don't know. Like, I think at the time, I would have leaned just about more towards Offspring, though it would have been a close run thing. I also think it is worth noting that, like, Offspring were, like, still on an indie label at that point in time. And I'm way too old to think that the whole indie versus major thing really means very much. But, like, it is interesting to me that in 1994, Offspring, it is still the biggest selling independent record of all time, Smash.
It's crazy.
And you know, they sold like 13 million copies or something. Because I was on Epitaph Records for a while, and therefore knowing Brett, and he was telling me that at one point he had to remortgage his house to keep up with the CD pressing because they didn't have enough ready cash on hand, and they needed to just physically press the CDs to sell them. And there was no money, so he just remortgaged his house and went, okay, and just handed all the money over. And obviously it was a pretty safe bet if that's the situation, you know what I mean? But nevertheless, it's like, and they like, apparently they had to like, everybody in a band on Epitaph at that moment in history was working in the Epitaph Records warehouse, just throwing bales of Offspring CDs into trucks and stuff. It's kind of amazing, you know? But I mean, you know, I guess I could be kind of like I could be a purist and say Descendants.
Smart man. But that had to have been pretty crazy if you're working at Epitaph Records at that time and punk rock is not mainstream and all of a sudden the spotlight is directly on them. That's got to be kind of a culture shock. I mean, you've kind of gone through something similar in your career where you came from the little punk scene and you still have kind of your punk roots and your punk rock DIY spirit and ethos. And then now you're kind of all of a sudden everyone's gravitating towards your music and people are discovering you and you're inspiring people. What is that like?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely so this is a well-trod path, which is so punk rock. It's kind of underground. It's kind of a collective vibe and all that kind of thing. And then you know people graduate from that scene to be more successful, and that happened at the beginning. Do you know what I mean? With the Clash, and it happened with the Ramones, and it happened like with all the big punk bands came from it. And there's a sort of inbuilt suspicion of success in some parts of the punk scene, and I kind of get it. And I certainly am guilty of like overindulging in that idea. You know, oh well, they're sellouts because more people than just us have heard of them or whatever. Do you know what I mean? And like, you know, sometimes people use the word sellout to be a synonym for successful, and I think that's lame. There is such thing as selling out, and as far as I'm concerned, it's very simple. Selling out means making music for anything other than your own best judgment. The end. But so you know, and I've been through it, and a lot of my friends have been through it, and you have to kind of grow a pretty thick skin around it because there's definitely a moment when it feels like your kind of gang is turning on you, and that's not much fun. But at the same time, like, I, like a lot of people, I was fortunate enough to be kind of surrounded by people to help me through that. So, for example, I remember being on tour with Gaslight Anthem, and they'd kind of just exploded, and I was heading in that direction. And I remember Brian saying to me, "Man, if they don't hate you on the punk news message boards, then you haven't achieved anything." Do you know what I mean?
Very true.
And like, you know, and I've been a kid on the punk news message boards, and like, and I don't want to just blanket like reject that impulse within the punk scene, because in its best form, it's a suspicion of motive, which can be pretty useful, actually.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, I mean, I'm not sure I've ever 100% claimed that my music is solely and purely punk rock. I come from punk music, I come from punk ethics and all that kind of thing. But like, it's always been as much folk music as it was punk rock, and indeed has gone into indie rock and pop music, and will go to other places too, and will go wherever the hell I want it to go because it's my music. You know what I mean? Which, to be blunt, is more punk than just making sure I constantly make records that sound like Rancid. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, you know, so I will follow my muse where it leads me. But I like to think on some level that like punk rock ethics still kind of inform my decision making. I have a theory that punk rock's like Catholicism. And what I mean by that is that there is such a thing as a non-Catholic, but there's no such thing as an ex-Catholic really deep down. You know what I mean? It's like if you've been in it at some point, it still informs your thinking, and you still get punk rock guilt is a real thing. And indeed, Ian Mackay is the Pope. You know what I mean? And it's like, you know, you lie awake at night and you kind of worry about what you've done wrong in the eyes of the punk ethics, or indeed Ian Mackay or whatever. And like, I've met Ian a few times and he's an absolute sweetheart, but nevertheless, you know what I mean? There have been days like I'm going to drop a name, but like, you know, I was playing on Ellen one time and I remember kind of sort of sitting in the backstage kind of being like, am I allowed to do this? Is this okay? And you know, screw it. I can do whatever I want. But like, yeah, but there is punk rock and Catholicism have a fair amount in common.
That may be the single best analogy I've ever heard. And having known a lot of people who are Catholic or quote unquote ex-Catholic, and so that makes it clear to me.
Right, but that's it. Then, I mean, and I'm not saying that there's no such thing as an ex-Catholic. There are people who stop believing, but it just informs the way you behave. Do you know what I mean?
No, right. I totally get it. What you're saying, like forever, no matter what, even the ex-Catholics can't really take that out of their psyche, so to speak, no matter how it works. And it's just growing up with Alan, it's sort of like that for him. I feel like no matter what, at the end of the night, he's always evaluating whether he's been punk enough or not.
Yeah, so true.
You know, like,
I hate to say
I'm like, I don't know, man. I don't know.
I don't know. And also, no one else cares. Like,
right, exactly.
And you're like, yeah, but I care.
But yeah, I will say James is kind enough to inform me when I haven't been punk enough from his very outside perspective. Yes.
Truly. Yeah, that's my role in the whole thing. Let me ask you this, you know, with all the lockdowns and quarantines, et cetera, how has it affected your desire or ability to make music? I mean, you have a lot of downtime. I don't really know how you make music, so to speak.
Yeah, it's been a roller coaster, and like sometimes, I'm not saying you, but sometimes people ask that question as if it's like lockdown was this monolithic experience and there's one answer to the question. And like, I think like a lot of people when it started, I mean, first of all, it was so unusual that it was kind of took the edge off in a funny way, because it was kind of like an adventure. It was like, oh, you know, a lockdown, an international calamity. I've been secretly hoping for this. So there was that. And then a lot of creative people I know, and not just musicians, but, you know, writers and actors and whatever that I know, they were like, well, at least it's some time to just focus on being creative without any external distractions like I have in my normal life. And I subscribed to that for a while until I realized that it was nonsense, because there was one distraction, which was the unprecedented global pandemic going on. Do you mean, like, good Lord? Like, you know, there was definitely things to be distracted about, you know what I mean? So, and I guess so, like, first of all, I had wildly different periods. I had moments of time where I'd be writing like 3 songs in a week, which for me is crazy. And then I would go like 3 months without writing a damn thing, you know? And, so it's very up and down on that level. Also, the other thing, and I suspect that the world is about to be cursed by this, is I wrote a lot of lockdown songs. And I think most people who write songs have probably written quite a lot of lockdown songs. And I've been doing my best to kind of like rewrite the lyrics so they're about something else for the most part. Because, I mean, some of them, I had this one song that was very specifically about what life was like in April 2020. And among other things, it just seems like it was a different lifetime right now. And I'm not sure how much people want to think about it once this is all over. Do you know what I mean? I think certainly initially, I think there's much more of a sense of kind of wanting to like escape, and party and get out of it, rather than hearing a song about like, there's no toilet paper in the shops. Like, like no, people don't care, you know what I mean? And nor should they. And so, but I have this kind of vague theory. There's a kind of lockdown song glut coming because there's sort of inbuilt time delay in the music industry between writing a song, recording a song, releasing a song. I'm doing my best not to contribute to that too much. There's one or two.
Of course, I mean there has to be, right?
Allowed one,
right?
There we go. Everyone's allowed one.
I mean, we went through, somewhat of a global trauma, so I think you're allowed a couple for sure. So you were right when you say that at first it kind of felt like an adventure, like we're going to stay home, we get we don't have to go into work, we can do all this kind of stuff. But the first time it really dawned on me, though, how monumental this was and everything we've lost is when I couldn't go to shows anymore. And so that's why when you were doing the independent love streams, that was something for me that really, for the first time, I kind of connected to the outside world. And I felt like this is, because a lot of bands are doing streams, but the fact that you were solely trying to benefit the venues who were hurting so badly at that time, to me, there was something really powerful about that. And I would look forward to them every single week. So those are done now, though, right? Because you're kind of coming out of it.
I sincerely hope so.
Yes.
I mean, to be honest, like I stopped doing them towards the end of last summer and figured that was the end of it because we felt like we were coming out of it. Then we had our second, third, whatever wave, and we were in full lockdown again in January. So I did them again for another kind of like 6 weeks or something. But I mean, so yeah, in many ways, I hope that they're done because that would imply that they're no longer required. I mean, it's important for me to recognize that, like, I mean, there's many things to say. I mean, first of all, the fact that I was able to do all of that as benefits came from a degree of privilege in the sense that, like, whilst the last year has been financially very rough for me, at the same time, I have reserves to draw on. I still sell T-shirts. You know what I mean? Like, it's not been pretty for me financially, but at the same time, I'm not like getting evicted. You know what I mean? So, and then I just sort of felt like I have this platform. And right at the beginning, I did a fundraiser for my band and crew that went alarmingly well. Like we raised like £44,000 in the first week, and it was just like, what? And it just kind of made me think, oh, well, okay, this is a tool. I have a platform I can monetize for other people's benefit. And I have tons of friends who run independent venues, and I've played at every single one in the UK. That's not strictly true, but it's not far off true. So it was like, cool. Well, and I think it's important to say that, like, of course I'm aware it's not the only sector that's been hurting, but I was just like, for me, it was like I wanted to pick one thing that I could focus my energies on, and that in a way that would make a noticeable difference. And then, I benefited from it myself in many ways. I mean, a lot of people talked about it giving structure to their week, and like, God damn, it did that for me as well. Like, let me tell you, like, just contrary to popular myth, the life of a touring musician is not one endless anarchic bachelor do. Do you know what I mean? It's right. Like it's very regimented. Do you know what I mean? I get given a day sheet before I go to bed that tells me what I'm doing every single minute of the following day. And I personally, I happen to thrive in that environment. It means I get more done. And it keeps me on the straight and narrow. And I have a history of issues with kind of substance abuse and stuff like that. And that kind of lifestyle is very useful to me. The beginning of lockdown, all of that evaporated. And for a couple of weeks, it was cool. It was like, because I tend to get off tour and just kind of go bleh and like day drink and watch Netflix in my underwear and whatever. But after a couple of weeks, it was like, I can't live like this forever. Like, this is ridiculous. So I put lots of different things in. One of them was learning how to kind of engineer and produce records properly, hence me now being in my studio. And one of them was a weekly show on Thursdays. And it meant I always knew what day of the week it was, generally by judging how hungover I still was from the preceding Thursday. But so it gave me structure and it gave me purpose and it gave me meaning in my life in a way that I really needed. of course, it then also raised a lot of money for people who really needed it, and I'm proud of that. Although, of course, I mean, I didn't donate the money myself, good Lord, but like it was cool to facilitate that money coming together for people who needed it.
Yeah, it really helped me quite a bit. It also gave me an excuse because you're on the in the time zones. You're ahead of us, so it gave me an excuse to crack a couple open a little early on my end and enjoy an early
I felt
weekend.
bad. There were some people from Australia who tuned in every week, and it was like 7 a.m. for them, and I'm like, I kind of hope you're not drinking.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
But I wouldn't blame you if you were.
So I know, and I don't want this whole discussion to be about COVID, but it does affect a lot of people. And your kind of motto is you're always on tour. So how has this affected you to all of a sudden you got to stay put?
Yeah, I mean, it's been rough actually. We're going heavy. You started it. Like the beginning. I mean, not just the beginning, but one of the major things for me, it wasn't just that. Like, I mean, I was actually on a tour that got cancelled, and I had to come home, and that sucked. Cancelling shows is the worst feeling in the world. I then had like a year's worth of stuff in the diary that all got binned, and that sucked. I had my first tour of South America. I had my own festival every year, and it was the 4th year running of that, and that was going to be the biggest one yet, and it was in Berlin. We had Henry Rollins on the bill, and we had to cancel that. So there was a lot of stuff like that. But the major thing in a way for me was identity. I've been touring since I was 16. And in fact, in that period of time, I would say that I probably spent 2/3 of that time on tour. And I just had to slightly just figure out who the hell I'm supposed to be if I'm not doing that. I lucked out in some ways in the sense that in the last kind of 5 years or so, I have kind of set about the business of trying to kind of repair some broken bits of my head in terms of my mental health, substance abuse. I got married, which has been fantastic, and just kind of like steadying my keel a little bit anyway. I didn't know there was a pandemic coming, but I was glad that I'd started doing some of that stuff. If this had happened like 7 years ago, I would be dead by now, like no question about it. And like that, incidentally, brief sidebar, like, I mean, I don't know how old everybody is in this conversation, but like I feel very fortunate to be the age I am in the sense that I've done my wild partying days, or most of them, and I'm married and I'm settled down in a place with a woman I love and in a place I love, and so on and so forth. And like for people who are in their like mid-20s, this is awful. Do you know what I mean? These are the and indeed for bands who have not reached the kind of place in their career that I've reached, because I know that I have an audience out there who will be there when this kind of lifts again. So I have friends who are in bands who are going to their first South by Southwest last year and it got cancelled, and it's like they missed that train, and will they ever get another place? You know what I mean? So I feel very, very lucky in many ways. But yeah, so I had to do a fair amount of kind of thinking about who I am and what I do. And I have actually, I've moved house during the pandemic. I moved out of London. And if you told me a year ago that I would leave London, I would have thought you were smoking crack. But here we are. And now I live by the sea. And that's a huge thing for me. It was one of those things. I've always said that one day I'm going to live by the sea. And then at some point during lockdown, it was like, well, what precisely were we waiting for?
You're doing it. You're doing it. And James, I'll let you jump in there so I don't dominate this whole conversation.
Oh, you're good, man. You're good. So, I mean, I think at least from my perspective, and again, I don't know a lot about the do-it-yourself punk ethos, but your live streams for the crew and the roadies and the band is in and of itself that, right? I was just wondering sort of if you could hit on, it's hard for people who aren't directly involved in the music industry or maybe have never been in bands, I mean, it's sort of I don't know. I think it's a hard thing and interesting. I only have ever played the accordion. So that's kind of where I sit down in life, and I stopped that at 14.
I was going to say, do you still play?
No, well, I could play Happy Birthday, Merry Christmas, not anything very exciting.
Dude, my birthday's right after Christmas, so I've got 3 days when you're going to be mega useful to me.
Okay. Yes, excellent. I'll be glad to assist in any way I can. I'll get practicing.
He works on commission.
About sort of the family, like, connection between band and crew, and you mentioned you've been touring since you were 16, and you sort of hit on it, like that separation from the road and the people who you are around constantly. How are they doing?
Yeah, I mean, that's hard. I mean, one of the things that I've been pleasantly not surprised by, but sort of like into, is that in the last year, like the last touring WhatsApp group that I had from a full band tour, because the tour I was on when this went down was a solo tour, but the last WhatsApp group from the last full band tour I did has remained a daily active thing, and me and my crew were all still just hanging out and chatting every day, and that's really nice. I really like that. And I've been doing my best. I've been to raise money for those guys here and there through the year, but it's not just about that. It's just like we are actually friends. It's kind of like, oh wow. Not least because the thing is, in the normal run of a year, you spend so much time with these people that when you go home, you tend to like be like, I don't want to talk to those people because I'm going to see them again in 3 weeks' time. And it's kind of nice. Everyone misses each other. That's kind of cool. I mean, it's a funny thing. Like, again, in normal times, like, there's a moment that like kind of fills me with a weird type of pride. It's like music festivals. Like, to pick an example, like a few years ago, we played Riot Fest in Chicago, and it just so happened that the bill that on our stage that day, I can't remember it exactly, but it was like Social Distortion, Dropkick Murphys, Flog and Molly, us, Hot Water Music, and Gaslight Anthem, I think. And it's all people who've toured together in one shape or another, but not just the bands. We know each other's crew. Do you know what I mean? And there were some people there who would crewed for that band, now they're crewing for this band, and we don't see much of each other because we're usually in our own little bubbles touring around the world. But there's this thing about music festivals, it's kind of like a gathering of the tribes. It's like, it's like a gypsy fair or something. Do you know what I mean? It's like you come together and you catch up and you swap stories. And most of us are kind of people with like questionable, like visible tattoos, and we tend to wear skinny black jeans and like, Black Flag t-shirts and all this kind of, and we're all kind of functioning alcoholics and all the rest of it. And like, but there's just this beautiful moment when you get there and you kind of look around, and more than I've ever felt anywhere else in my life, I'm like, my people, like my tribe, this is where I belong. This is, and there's a language, and some of these people are from Germany and some of them are from Canada and some of them are from America and I'm from England, and that doesn't matter. That's all out the window. It's just like, that's my tribe. And I've missed that like you wouldn't believe. And obviously I've stayed in touch with my own crew, but it's not just about that. So I had a thing the other day. There's a British punk band called the Wild Hearts, who are one of my all-time favorite bands, and they did a live stream and they asked me to go down and sing a couple of songs because I've guested on one of their records. And so I went down, and like, it was an interesting thing. Like, everyone they've got the rapid COVID test now. So everyone had a test to get into the filming. And once that was done, like, restrictions were lifted, kind of thing. So like, I went in and I didn't just see the Wild Hats guys, but I saw their guitar tech and their drum tech and their sound guy and their monitor guy and their tour manager, and we all just hugged, and it was just like, fuck. Sorry, I don't know if I'm supposed to be swearing on this or not, but I just did. I've been trying quite hard not to until now.
You're doing great, man. No worries. Yeah.
That was an appropriate first F-bomb because it was an emotional moment. But, it was just kind of incredible. And part of it was just like, you guys are still here, And because none of these are people that I know enormously well, but they're people that I've shared road with, and we have the same kind of lifestyle and the same background. And it's just, I don't know. It was a really, really, really emotional day for me to just kind of remember that actually, Dunk is still out there fixing guitars. I hadn't seen him for like a year and a half, and he's still got the same haircut, and he's still doing the same thing, and he still drinks too much and fixes guitars or whatever, and he's still a diamond, and I love him. Do you know what I mean? And it was just like, oh wow. So yeah, that is definitely a thing I miss enormously, and like the transition from here back into quote unquote normal is going to be I think it's going to be a lot stranger and a lot more difficult than a lot of people are currently making it out to be, because it's not just about regulations, it's about how people feel and how they behave. And I think that there's going to be some sticky moments, because there are some people, and we all know who I'm talking about here, who are not going to care at all, and they're going to go straight back and they're going to be moshing to the house music before the first band comes on, and they're going to be hugging everybody and spilling beer all over themselves and so on and so forth. And there's going to be other people who are really nervous about going back to shows, and there's going to be a culture clash in there somewhere. And do you know what I mean? So there's just a lot, and at some point there's going to be the first COVID outbreak that's traceable to a show, and that's going to be big news, you know what I mean? And yet, in theory, if we're in a place where people have been vaccinated or whatever, blah 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 blah. So there's all this kind of stuff to think about. But having said all that, like, I mean, I can't wait, and I do think there is going to be some really, really profoundly emotional moments in the medium term, should we say? Do you know what I mean? Like, the first time I get up on a stage in front of a comfortably socially undistanced crowd to play a show is gonna be something.
It's going to be.
Then prepare yourself for that. I mean, I would think that's just you speaking on it right now, not being a musician. And I think about the first show that I'll go to. I'm probably 50-50 where I'll be trying my best to navigate it and wondering. I can't fully get COVID out of my brain at that moment, but I imagine for you, a musician on stage looking out after so far and traveling for, since you were 16, it feels like that'll be sort of a very full circle, hopefully, kind of routine.
I hope so, but it's kind of impossible to say because it's never happened before in my lifetime, and like, I hope that it'll be like very emotional. I don't know. I've never taken this much time off the road before. Do you know what I mean? Actually, funnily enough, like there was in going back to where we started all this in a slightly less dramatic way. Like there's been moments in the last few years where I've toyed with like maybe I'll take a year off the road and just like go and like work in a bar in Paris, so that I can like write songs or some nonsense like that. And like now I've taken a year off the road because I had to, and I'm like, I promise I'll never do this again. Like, don't like, I didn't mean it. I'm sorry. Forgive me, Mr. Road. It's like, so, but yeah, I genuinely have no idea what it's going to be like. I did some shows last summer, some socially distanced outdoor shows and stuff that were like, some of them were socially distanced shows. One of them was like a government pilot show and all this kind of thing. And like, they were emotional enough and they weren't like normal shows, you know what I mean? And indeed that was in like July and we've been locked down since March. Now we're talking about well over a year. I think it's going to be intense.
Yeah, I agree. Well, we're coming up on, I know you got to run, so we're coming up on the end of our time, but we have a good friend of the show. He's a personal friend of both of ours, and he's a massive fan of you. His nickname on the show is Nate the Hemorrhoid. So take that for what it is. I asked him, since he's such a massive fan of yours, I asked him if he had any questions or anything he'd like to share, and he just wanted to say that like I said, he's a huge fan. He's read your book, and in the book you mentioned your first show in Salt Lake City. I think it was at Bar X or something like that.
Oh yeah. And
he was there, but
oh no shit.
But he left early because he got there and waited. And he asked he called him the douchebag bouncer. He said, so is Frank coming on, And the guy's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And he waited another 45 minutes or something and asked, is Frank going to be here? And he's like, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. Fuck off. And so then he was like, I guess he's not playing. So he left. And then he read about that show in your book, and he's just gutted that he missed that experience. So.
I would say this was in, hold on, I can do this. This was in 2008, probably. So I'm not going to claim that the details are clear in my mind. What I do remember from that was that I was on this tour. We were in a van. This is all in the book, but here we are. I was touring with a band called Look Mexico, and their van ran on like chip fat. It was, which meant that its top speed was about 45 miles an hour, and maybe a little faster if you're going downhill. And it meant that every single thing I possessed smelt of fries for about 2 years afterwards. But they were great guys and everything, and I was kind of bunking with them. But we did, I'll never forget this. We played in Boise to about like 16 people. But it was cool. I'd never been to Boise before. And then we had to drive from Boise to Salt Lake, and it was a long way, and it's through the mountains and all this kind of thing. So, and we were like, well, look, we'll get some hours in after the Boise show, and then we'll just pull in a motel somewhere and spend the night, and then get up early and drive the rest of the way to Salt Lake. We drove into this horizontal blizzard, and it was like, I'd never seen anything like it before in my life. And we couldn't stop because we couldn't see the exits from the freeway. So, and we were traveling like 15 miles an hour, and we basically drove constantly from the end of the Boise show until we arrived in Salt Lake in time for, we did 2 shows that day, in time for the first Salt Lake show. So no one had slept. Everyone was just wired on coffee and exhausted and like terrified and hungry and all this kind of thing. And we played like a youth center in the afternoon for an all ages show. And then we played that Bar X show in the evening. And I just remember, like, I was like, I'm going to get really drunk. And the problem is that like they water down the beer in Salt Lake City because of Mormonism.
Yeah, we deal with it all the time. It sucks.
Yeah, and there is a point below which it's actually quite difficult to get drunk because you're just imbibing so much liquid. And I was just like slamming pitchers going, why am I not drunk? at the bar, and they watered down their spirits and everything. And I was just trying so hard to get wasted, and I failed. I just had to go to the loo a lot. So that's my enduring memory of my first trip to Salt Lake City.
Well, he's seen you many times, so he's made up for it for sure. But he was bummed when he read that in the book and missed that. Last thing I'll say is I also asked my son.
By the way, send him my best, please.
I will. Nate the Hemorrhoid. Frank says hi. I asked my son. My son is 16 years old. He's just learning to play the bass. He loves your music. I asked him if he wanted to ask you a question, and he came up with a big fat nothing. So I guess he misses out. So I just had to call him out right now.
I talk a lot, so I've probably answered it anyway.
Yeah, probably have. But Frank Turner, James, is there anything else you'd like to hit on real quick before we let him go?
No, other than just saying thanks for coming on. And you don't get to talk to musicians a lot who, in my opinion, embody what you hope musicians would be, and you've done that for me. So thank you.
That's very kind of you to say.
No, well, it's true. I trust me. I wouldn't say if it wasn't true. I appreciate where you're coming from and what you're doing, and I hope nothing but continued success and keep doing your thing. I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, We've done a lot of interviews over the years doing this show, and it doesn't always end up so well. This is the first time I've been nervous in a long time because I am a huge fan. And
yeah, he texted me last night. You should know. He texted me and he's like, "Man, do you got 5 minutes to talk? I'm getting nervous, and I'm sorry to out you." And that's not a very common thing. Like I don't get those texts from him very often.
Alan, you pulled it off. You pulled it off, man.
Well, I thank you. I appreciate it.
You're wearing a Bouncing Souls shirt, right?
I am, yeah. This is a breast cancer T-shirt they did years and years ago. It's a Motorhead.
Okay, well, in which case, we're friends anyway.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Frank Turner, thanks for joining us, man. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Frank Turner. Crazy. I still can't believe it. He popped up on the screen. Like I said, I told him in the interview, and I didn't really get to really explain it. We've been doing this a long time. We've interviewed a lot of people on this show. Big names, little names, friends, strangers. And I have not been nervous for an interview like this since probably Nick Raimondo, which is our second interview, I think.
Yeah, you dealt with it well. You're a professional, needless to say. You're a professional. Just consider, what a beautiful interview, in all honesty. And I don't even really like to toot our horns. It was more Frank being Frank,
right?
And giving him space, to give his insights into the world, what he's experienced during COVID, and where he sees himself headed. Truly, like I said at the end of the interview, it's musicians are a unique group of people in my life experience, and we often give them, a persona that we want them to have based on us liking their music. And so at least I always worry when I meet musicians that they're kind of going to be like opposite of what you would hope they are.
Right.
And fortunately for us, Frank Turner is everything we hoped he would be and more. And I think it was demonstrated over the last 40 minutes.
That is always kind of the fear, right? And it's not really, at the same time, it's not really fair, but we do it naturally where we project a personality onto a musician or an actor or whoever it is, someone we look up to. We kind of just naturally do that, but it's not really fair because they shouldn't be forced to live up to the standards that we set. That's the thing. But
truly,
Frank, the thing about talking to him, and I had a suspicion that it would be this way, is he's just so genuine in every interview I've ever read or heard of him. Even his stage banter, he's just so genuine that I kind of felt like that is who who Frank Turner is, and I feel like we got that as well. So, again, great job getting that, man. That was a nice little treat for me. I appreciate that. Yeah. All right. So we will be back again on Thursday for our regular show. We'll be talking lots of jazz basketball, I'm sure. And the playoff picture is shaping up. So join us then. And in the meantime, head over to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/DD on sports, or you can head over to doganddeuce.com for all our previous episodes, all our previous interviews, anything you could want from us. And send us an email, doganddeuce@gmail.com. I'm Dog.
And I'm Deuce.
And we will talk to you on Thursday.
Thanks for making us a part of your day.